request that God has made of us. And if you were here last night, we talked about, and Megan, if you'll put that first slide up, or slide number 2, I guess. We talked about 10 reasons to practice hospitality. We'll unpack a few of those today. But we saw a definition that says, eagerly sharing the resources of my home to benefit others. And some of you came up and said, my house just right now, there's just no way. The stage of life that I'm in with my kids and my stuff, and explain different situations. And I'm not here to make you feel bad or feel guilty or ashamed. That is not it. I'm here to encourage you with what I've learned. But I also want you to understand that you're sharing the resources of your home. Your home is probably your biggest investment, your most valuable possession. And you're sharing. It could be people sleeping, eating there, but it could be that you're making food, that you're providing things from within your home. And one person was telling me, I just can't have people in. But the friend standing next to her said, yes, but every time you come for house church, you bring some baked, a delicious goodie. And that's hospitality. That's extending hospitality too. But I will say that recently I was reading in Ecclesiastes 3, the famous passage that says, there's a time for everything. There's a time to live. There's a time to die. And there's a long list of things. And ladies, there is a time to share hospitality. And if you haven't found that time, if you haven't come to that place in your life, it's something to make the necessary changes in so that there will be a time for hospitality. And we talked about last night how it was commanded in Scripture, not just for us women, but for men specifically, but really all believers are to have the heart of hospitality. So let's pray as we get into this. There's one man in the Old Testament, well, there were two. One particularly that was called a friend of God. And can you think of who that might be in the Old Testament? Moses spoke to God, it says, as friend to friend. So that's a little different, but the man Abraham was called a friend of God. And so we're going to look at Abraham as we get started here. And the next slide shows the scripture that we're going to look at. We're going to look at 8 short verses in the book of Genesis 18. Now, Abraham was the father of the Jewish nation. They looked up to him so much. And so we're going to look at what this friend of God did when it was concerning hospitality. Now, the purpose of this passage, I tell you, is not to teach us about hospitality, but we can certainly learn from it, and we are. The passage is about the 3 angelic visitors who come to give Abraham the news that his wife Sarah is going to have the promised child, Isaac. So, it's interesting to see, though, how hospitality plays into this passage, because it's an important part. Abraham shows hospitality, and then the blessing follows that. So verse 1 says that Abraham was sitting by the trees of Mamre as he was sitting in the tent door in the heat of the day. Now he's here at noontime. I guess it's kind of like a siesta. And he's resting. It's brutal heat. And the Lord appears to him. Now Abraham doesn't know it's the Lord. He just knows it's visitors. So they must have had the form of a man. And so Abraham doesn't know it, but he immediately begins to extend the hospitality. And I think, would it have been possible that Abraham would have missed this blessing had he not extended the hospitality? I know that God intended to use Abraham, but it could have delayed the blessing had he not extended hospitality. And I have to ask myself, are there blessings and words from the Lord that he's waiting to give me after I respond in obedience of opening my home? So Abraham, it says in verse 2, that he lifted his eyes and he looked, and there were 3 men standing there. Now we know that they were angels. He didn't. All Abraham knows is that there's 3 men who are passing there in the heat of the day. And when he saw him, you get the idea that he hurriedly, it was with an excitement and with a spontaneity, that he rushes to them to meet their needs. And then it says he bows to them and says, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass your servant by. That servant's heart. And then in verse 4, he says, let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. And I'll bring you some bread that you may refresh your hearts. So Abraham is just bursting with hospitality. And I don't see him thinking, well, I wonder if I have time for this today. I know that Abraham was a wealthy man. He had lots to tend to and to look out after. He had things on his schedule. But when God places people in your path, if we're not so busy, the people that we're to minister to are usually those that he brings right in front of you. And so that's what Abraham did, and I see that he was flexible and willing to drop his schedule to serve. And then I see in Abraham something that we should learn, and that is, he said, it's an honor for me to serve you. I am privileged that you are here in my home. You're not an imposition. I'm so glad that you're here. And that's how it is when people visit us. The focus isn't on me and the food that I've cooked and the way I've fixed my house and the way I've decorated it. The focus is on the visitor, or is to be on the visitor. And so he is very practical. He thinks to himself, what is it they need? They're tired. They need water. They need a foot washing, and they need some food. So he meets the practical needs. And then in verse 6, we see something that it's not always easy. Hospitality and entertaining and hosting people takes work. Listen to this in verse 6. There's effort and time involved. So it says he hastened to the tent of Sarah, good old Sarah. You know, I don't know that he would have been so good at hospitality if his wife hadn't been there to help him out. And so he hastened to the tent of Sarah and said, quickly, Sarah, make 3 loaves of bread. Knead it, grind it, make the loaves of bread. And that's kind of funny to us because if any of you are bread makers, it's not a quick thing. Regina, how long does it take to get the whole thing? Is it hours? The way you all do it with the starter. But it could be a matter of hours that Abraham is entertaining these guests, because sometimes we want to do the job and then be done with it so we can get on with our lives. Do you think Sarah fussed at him for doing that? Do you think she said, well, Abraham, what are you thinking? Or I'm busy, or do you think she did any of that? Probably a little. No, but you know what? Sarah is used as a model in 1 Peter 3 of a woman who served her husband and called him master, and we're called to be her children. 1 Peter 4:9 says, show hospitality without grumbling. Without grumbling. I wish they could just lift off that last prepositional phrase, without grumbling. And if you look up that Greek word for grumbling, I'm not going to try to pronounce it, but the root of the word is gong, G-O-N-G. Show hospitality without gonging. And you know how it is, the okay? Without that reflex and reaction, and without grumbling, I think is a reasonable way to say it. But also, something that comes along with opening your home, showing hospitality, serving others, is the gonging of what I'm doing. Hey, I want everyone to notice. Boy, look what I am doing. I've got to go home and make 3 casseroles tonight. Wow, I'm really working hard in service. And it's very hard for me, if I'm serving in some way, not to say something to somebody about the schedule that I have today.